Welcome to our first virtual Live, Learn, Lead luncheon. I am Jan Paul. I'm Executive Director of Leadership Sandy Springs, and we are thrilled to be offering our very first luncheon session of Live, Learn, Lead. I would like to thank our sponsors who are making it possible for us today to bring you this luncheon, this conversation, and that is Northside Hospital and CenterState Bank. We appreciate their support. I am Executive Director of Leadership Sandy Springs, and I know that we have some people on the call today who are not alumni, who are community members. And so I just want to let you know that Leadership Sandy Springs is a community leadership development organization, a nonprofit, where we develop and educate leaders and we connect our community. And our goal is to be catalysts for transformational progress in our community. Today, for our first virtual meeting, we are talking about fair voting, make it count. And I think everyone on our session today, all of our voters out there want to ensure that our votes do count. This is a nonpartisan session. We are a nonpartisan organization. And so we are thankful that we have panelists today that can bring you varying points and perspectives. So one other little housekeeping thing for everyone to know is that we will have Q&A at the end, and we ask you to put your Q&A, put your questions into our chat room, and we have folks there that will be monitoring that and passing along your questions. I would like to introduce you to our panel. We are thrilled with the gentleman that can join us today. I would like you to meet Gabriel Sterling. He is with the Secretary of State's office, and many of you know Gabe because he is a former city councilman with the city of Sandy Springs. I would also like you to meet Vasu Abhiraman, and he is with the ACLU. He is a policy counsel with the ACLU, and he is a neighbor of ours in Dunwoody. And I would also like you to meet Josh Belenfante. He is an alumni of Leadership Sandy Springs, class of 2015, and Josh is an attorney for the Robbins Law Firm and has tremendous experience in election law. So I would like to pass this along to Josh so that he can kick us off with our discussion today.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Gabe and Vasu. We'll jump right into it because I know we've got a limited time and a fair amount probably to discuss. Gabe, let me start with you and then turn to Vasu to see if you've got different or similar thoughts. Can you give us all just kind of an update in terms of what we're seeing on early voting so far in Georgia?
Well, since day one, it's essentially like Secretary Raffensperger said in his press conference yesterday, with every passing hour, we're breaking a new record. So we're seeing tremendous turnout in both the absentee world, which is the mail-in voting side, as well as the in-person absentee. And as I'm sitting here right now, I think we're probably getting close to 1.8 million votes already cast. And we're looking at about 160,000 votes a day, give or take. We had 90,000 votes over the weekend in just a handful of counties that were open on Saturday and or Sunday. And we have about, 846,000 absentee ballots that are still outstanding to be sent in, on top of the 711,000 that have already been returned and accepted by the counties. So, and as of this morning, when we got up, we were at 982,367 in-person votes. So obviously it's tremendous, overwhelming turnout. And as part of Secretary Raffensperger's November action plan was to try to get as many voters in Georgia to take advantage of all these pre-election day options. And we're seeing good adoption of that. We're hoping that will help take some pressure off of election day. However, there's two ways to interpret the data right now. We're gonna have to get some more information in before we know exactly what's happening. The hope was to push people from election day voting to pre-election day voting and making sure that everybody has the opportunity to vote the way they want, the way they feel safest. Now we're seeing a lot of high turnout in the two models available right now. And of course, the intent is to make that means that election day should have less pressure on it. It could signal something else. It could signal that we're going to see record turnout on election day as well. So We're not sure exactly where it's going to fall yet, but we're doing all we can to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to vote in a way they feel most comfortable. And this is kind of what it looks like for voting in a pandemic.
Great. Thank you. Basu, do you have anything that you're hearing and seeing out there with the work you're doing in the field?
Sure. I would say in a general sense, voters are as determined as we've ever seen them, willing to do whatever it takes over the river and through the woods to cast their ballot in this election. Would also like to mention that, and this is in accordance with the numbers that were released last night. Of course, Gabe has the connection to the real-time numbers, but as of last night, there were about 1.7 million votes cast and a little over 700,000 votes by mail, with the rest, almost 1 million, being early in person. I think Gabe's probably confirmed that we've crossed the 1 million mark for early in person at this point. Importantly, it seems like more than 1 out of every 5 voters that is casting their ballot, that has cast their ballot right now, is someone who did not vote in the 2016 general election. Now, this may not mean that they are folks who decided to sit out the election. These could be new folks who have come into Georgia, but nonetheless, that's a group of folks who weren't around in 2016, showing up to the polls or submitting their absentee ballots. So we're also seeing that counties and the Secretary of State's office are doing a pretty good job responding to this record turnout. There were some kinks in the first couple of days, and I think that frustrated a lot of voters. But there was a lot of good rapid response, both on the county side when it came to hiring more poll workers, opening some new polling locations. We're going to see more polling locations in the last week of early vote next week. And then the election software seems to have increased in its bandwidth. So voters are determined to do whatever it takes. And there are many different officials on the local and state level who are working to make that experience better on the voters.
And just to confirm this, to Vasu's point, I do have the real-time numbers that just came in. We're at 1,045,968 in-person voters and 731,979 absentee by mail voters. So it's a total of 1,777,947 voters. So we will obviously break the 1.8 mark today, and we'll start getting close to probably the 1.9 million, puts us on a track to get to 2.5 million by Friday.
Got it. And Gabe, do you know, not to put you on the spot, comparatively, how much that's an increase from 2018 or 2016?
600%.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a huge increase. I mean, we had already had a big adoption of advanced voting anyway. And what we saw was some more behavioral things. A lot of the absentee ballots were being done by behavioral early vote people, and not so much election day folks. So that's about 23, 24% of what we're looking at. We do know that by doing this, we've taken about 500,000 people we would have anticipated to vote on election day to the pre-voting options. But obviously, it's incomparable on the absentee ballot side. We historically did 5%. In the primary, we did, I think it was 50%. And now we're probably going to be blowing through about 35% will be absentee by mail, maybe another 35% of in-person absentee, if not more. So we're breaking records, and it's hard to compare because it's unknowable to a degree on some of that, but it's a lot higher. So,
got it.
Yeah, I think at this point, previously there were 1 million fewer votes cast around that, probably even more at this point. Went from 700,000 to more than 1.7 million at this point, which is incredible to see.
And so let me follow up on that with you, Vasu. If a voter, for whatever reason, doesn't want to vote in person, and they have not yet requested their absentee ballot, what should they be doing at this point?
If they truly don't want to vote in person, and that's a very good question, right? Every vote in Georgia is cast either absentee by mail or quote unquote absentee in person, which is early vote colloquially, and then in person on election day. Those are the only 3 ways you can cast your ballot in Georgia. So if you don't want to do it in person, that gets rid of number 2 and 3, the absentee in person / early vote, and then the election day in person. So you would have to request a ballot by mail. What we would say is, based on what we've seen out of the Postal Service and possible inconsistencies and delays there, get your ballot request in now. Get it in immediately, and make sure that the information that you submit for your ballot request is accurate. The Secretary of State has a great system right now at ballotportal.sos.ga.gov for you to request your ballot if you are someone who has a Georgia driver's license. If you happen to have an out-of-state ID, you can use other portals. We are hosting one at acluga.org/Georgia Votes, and that uses a tool called votebymail.io in order to request your ballot. Due to a quirk in the time I was living in DC, corresponding with a time when my Georgia driver's license expired, I actually still use a DC driver's license. So I use that votebymail.io tool in order to request the ballot. I'll put that link in the chat. But the core message here is, if you don't want to show up in person, there's only one other way to vote, which is to vote by mail. And please request your absentee ballot immediately. And if you have any issues with it, you can email us at voting@acluga.org and we'll help you out.
Similarly to echo Vasu's there, stop watching this Zoom call. Go online to securevotegA.com and go to the absentee ballot request portal like right this second. Now, not everybody who has a driver's license has their driver's license attached to their voting record. The vast majority of us do, about 95%. So there's a small percentage of you that don't. So if it doesn't find you on there, you're gonna have to get a paper request form in very quickly. So I'm very much need you to do that. Now, one of the things that's happened is the state was fulfilling these ballots for about 120 of the 159 counties. As of last Thursday, the state stepped off. That was the last draw we got of people who made requests. And starting on Friday, the counties themselves are fulfilling this to try to close down and get 2 or 3 days back of mailing time on those items. But the other part about doing it online is you save the time of the postage and mail and everything else. And also it clears up the opportunity for a poll worker or county worker to put the wrong information in, which can happen when you have 1.7 million people requesting ballots, and 1 million of those or so are going to be by paper and somebody's hand inputting things. There's a possibility they could put the wrong address in and those kind of items. By going through the portal, you're much more likely to get the right information transferred properly. Now, be careful in the portal. I was talking to one of our mutual friends in Sandy Springs who was concerned that their ballot hadn't shown up yet, and I tracked it down and I called them and said, by chance, did you use a paper application or the online portal? They use the online portal. And the second I asked that question, I said, well, this is kind of something you did. They said, I forgot to put my PO box number on there, didn't I? And I said, yes, you did. So there's a lot of this is going to be on human error when things don't happen as quickly and cleanly as possible. But really, if you want to get a ballot in the mail, don't hesitate. I was kidding about leaving the Zoom call because you need to learn more, but do it right after this Zoom call. Go to securevotegA.com and hit secure absentee, and you can go quickly to get that request in.
Great.
I would also like to mention there
Go
are
ahead.
human beings doing data entry when it comes to the absentee ballot process at the county level. This means human error is possible. The best way to guard against that human error would be to use the Secretary of State portal, because that's tied right in to the county election software, the state election software. And therefore, the translation between a possible emailed ballot or a mailed-in ballot request and entering your information into the election software is not ripe for human error in that way.
Perfect. Let me ask a question that came from our audience participants. Speaking of the portal, does the state absentee ballot portal tell you if your ballot is rejected? And I'll expand that also to your absentee ballot request.
Here's the main thing you want to be able to do. When you go to the absentee ballot portal, you're going to get an acknowledgement that your ballot was received or your request was received. In there, there's a way you can sign up for something new for Georgia voters, which Secretary Raffensperger had us launch, which Vote From Home has graciously given us a grant to provide, which is georgiaballottracks.com. And in there, you can put in your phone number to get text messages and your email to get emails. And you get notifications on your ballot's been mailed, your ballot's been accepted, your ballot's been rejected. That way you more quickly get those items in. It's a new service we're providing this year. And so far, about 142,000 Georgians are taking advantage of it. And that's the best and easiest way to get those. Now, under the law, you have to be notified if your ballot is rejected, and you're given an opportunity to cure that ballot up to 3 days after the election, the Friday after that Tuesday. And as we get closer to the election, I think right now you have to be notified within 3 days of a rejection. As we get closer to the election, it drops down to 1 day. They have to give you an opportunity to do that. And then you have the 3 following days to try to cure that. Most of what we're seeing is people on the online one, you're not going to get rejected. I mean, that's very difficult to get rejected. For the paper one, signature not being there is probably the biggest one. Make sure you sign your application. Because all they have to do is identify you and have a signature to make sure it's you for the signature match at the county level. But you should get notified in all those situations, yes.
All right. Similarly, we had a question from the audience in terms of time. We were talking about what to do if you wanted to vote absentee now. Is it too late to sign up to be a poll worker now? And if not, what should residents of Fulton County do if they want to be a poll worker?
To be honest, at this point, you probably need a time machine. You need to go back about a month and then sign up. So that's kind of where you're at right now. We were just Vasu and I were both on a call earlier with Rick Barron, who's the head of the elections and registration for Fulton. And they are overwhelmed. They've got a backlog of like 1,000 names. The Secretary of State has worked with diverse groups from the ACLU all the way over to Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce, and we provided over 40,000 names of people who wanted to be poll workers. Now, many of those have been hired, and they're going to be poll workers. Many other ones are going to be technicians, what we call the field service technicians out there all across Georgia. So we appreciate everybody's zeal to be a poll worker. I want to do that, and I encourage you in the future, because maybe there's not going to be as much excitement next election as these get more boring, and we want to have as many people who are your neighbors helping you vote. So I would encourage you to stay involved and continue to ask to be a poll worker, for the weird special elections that come up or the random city elections that come up. And so that's a thing you can actually do in the future. Don't be discouraged by the fact you may not have gotten in this time, because there was a wild demand, and especially in Fulton. I mean, Vasu, how many of your people were all Fulton County people that you sent us? I mean, we've got thousands of people in Fulton who were trying to get in.
Yeah, Fulton's been a really popular place for people to put their name in the hat to be a poll worker. I will say, since this is a Sandy Springs based call, if there's anybody who might get chosen at the last minute, it's folks in North Fulton. And I know in Sandy Springs, it's one of the places where a few polling locations were added, and Fulton County is still kind of working through the bureaucracy on ensuring that folks are placed there. So it can't hurt. I would say submit your information at acluga.org/poll workers, and we can try to get you in if possible. But again, it is pretty late in the game, but given that you're likely to be a Sandy Springs resident if you're on this call, go ahead and put your name in if you're interested, and we'll see what we can do.
Okay. Gabe or Vasu, whichever wants to go first. What is it that we're shifting to election day? What should voters expect? Are there times that are better to go to the polls on election day? And do they need to bring anything with them?
Okay, the easiest one of that one is bring your ID. We are a voter ID state. Make sure they can identify who you are. The other thing is, and frankly, this happens every year, don't think, hey, I'm going to go first thing in the morning and get it out of the way. Because essentially, that's what everybody thinks. And that's not what happens. That's where you always have your longest lines at the very beginning of the day. It's better to go, if you can, that sort of mid-morning time, that 10:30. By then it's sort of spread out some. And then there's a lunch rush. And then there's kind of like that 1:30 to 4 p.m. lull. And there's a 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. big rush at the end for people coming back from work. So those hours in between, it's kind of a big sort of W looking thing. It's really high in the morning, goes down mid-morning, goes back up at lunch, goes back down after lunch, then gets really heavy at the very end. So if you want to go on election day, choose those sort of middle, those trough times. That's sort of, 10 to 11:30 and like 1:30 to 4 are the best times to probably go. And if this is Sandy Springs call, if you're in Fulton, as Vasu pointed out, Fulton has done a really good job of providing more polling locations than they had during the height of the pandemic when they got knocked down to, I think it was 164. They're providing 255 this time. And another secret thing we all have in Fulton or in Sandy Springs that most people don't know about for early voting is go to the Dorothy Benson Center. We don't tell anybody about it, I think, because there's never any lines there. There's always like 2-hour lines at the library. It's literally 0.9 miles north of there. So go to the Dorothy Benson Center. Tell your friends to do that too.
And let me ask this, Vasu, maybe you can take this one. If someone has requested an absentee ballot and either it didn't come or they want to change their vote from the time they still have it, can they do anything on election day once they've requested that absentee ballot to vote in person?
Absolutely. By law, if they haven't returned their absentee ballot yet, you can show up in person. Bring your ballot with you. I'm going to repeat that. Bring your ballot with you unless you want to wait a long time to get your ballot canceled. There's a procedure in the law that's required in order for that absentee ballot to get canceled so that you can actually vote in person on election day to prevent you from double voting. It's a good procedure. But if you bring your ballot, you can get out of having to have the poll manager make a call to a central office in order to cancel your ballot. So you can absolutely show up in person, even if you've requested your ballot, whether or not you've actually received it. But if you have received it and you want to save some time, bring that ballot in, and the procedure is much more straightforward in that way.
You're muted, Gabe.
No, I saw. Let me make a suggestion. If you have an absentee ballot and you want to vote in person, please don't do it on election day. If you can avoid it, do it during the early voting time because it's a lot easier to cancel your absentee ballot then. Fulton is taking steps more than most counties to make it easier to cancel. But one of the things we saw causing some of the really long lines in June was the 200,000 people canceling their ballots and having to call back to the headquarters and then verify. And when you have multiple locations calling, a handful of people at one time, it caused a bottleneck. So if you feel the need to cancel your absentee ballot, please do it during the early voting session rather than on election day. We understand that it might happen, and there is a process, like Vasu said, to do that, but it's a little more complex, and it can take up time and affect your neighbor's ability to do that. I saw somebody the other day that says essentially the equivalent of whipping out a checkbook in the 10 items or less line at the grocery store now. So just kind of keep that in mind.
I'd like to add to that. Gabe mentioned steps that Fulton is taking in order to remediate the delays that were caused by this process on June 9th. Fulton is planning on stationing a quote unquote deputy registrar at every single polling location, that is all 255 polling locations, in order to cancel absentee ballots on site and negate the need for a phone call to a central office that may or may not go through and that had caused excessive delays on June 9th. If you're interested in signing up for that program, we, the ACLU of Georgia, are involved in helping to recruit for it. We're focusing on attorneys. And the reason we're focusing on attorneys is because attorneys have these ethical obligations that come with maintaining their law license. And we want to make sure that for the first iteration of this process, that the highest standards of ethics and procedure are accorded with. So I'll go ahead and put a link in the chat there. But if you are an attorney who wants to help on election day, I cannot recommend this Fulton Deputy Registrar program more. I think it's the most impactful way that you can spend election day. So please sign up if you can.
So I should avoid my normal ethics and lawyer joke here? Is that? That was for
I'll
you,
let Josh comment on that one.
I'm an election lawyer who represents a government. I'm here to help. Let me ask this, Gabe. We've talked a lot about Fulton County and what the secretary is doing. There seems to be perceptions out there that the secretary runs all elections, and then there's perceptions that the counties, there seems to be some confusion on what they do. Can you speak briefly as to the division between the county and the state when it comes to election administration?
I can attempt to. I mean, at the end of the day, it's sort of a shared service delivery model. The state provides essentially state election board rules, which kind of the rules for the road, and we provide the equipment, and we sort of train the trainers. But counties actually administer the election itself. They decide where the polling place is going to be. They decide what equipment goes to the polling place. They train the poll workers. They assign the poll workers. They're in charge of their own voter registration system. We have centralized, but they are the ones to put it in. Like, as an example, we have the state quote unquote online portal to request absentee ballots. You're not actually asking the state. What we're doing is we provided an avenue for you to send that request to a dashboard of the county, and a county worker decides, yes, you are who you say you are, and we can now send you a ballot. The state has nothing to do with that. In this particular case, the state has stepped in to provide more resources due to COVID and really sort of centralize the absentee ballot process in large part for both the primary and the general. That's not historically what we've done before, but we're doing it to provide help and service to the counties, because if the counties were left to their own resources, especially some of the very under-resourced counties, they would have been crushed. Fulton County is by far the most resourced county in the state when it comes to elections. They have $34 million to spend this year. As an example, the state budget to run elections, quote unquote, run elections, our elections division is $5.8 million. So it's a very disproportionate kind of thing. And really the counties are the ones that run the elections. I mean, one of my favorite stories was from the 2018 election. I remember there was this conversation, it's like, why did Brian Kemp keep those extension cords away from that polling place in Gwinnett County? No, he had nothing to do with that. That's a Gwinnett County thing. So similarly, we get those kind of things all the time. Why didn't the state take care of this? Why didn't the state do this? Why didn't the state do that? It's not really a role for us to a degree, but this particular election time, we've really tried to support and help the counties. And we've done a lot of research. We've gone through every polling location and looked at their equipment allocations, their personnel allocations. We provide, like I said, 40,000 names of poll workers altogether. It's been a lot of work together to get this done. And just to put some more perspective on this, when Secretary Raffensperger and his whole elections team started this year, the hardest thing we were going to do was implement a new voting system with a paper ballot, which we hadn't seen in 20 years. And then COVID hit. And then we had to move elections. Then we had to move elections again. So, and then we had to deal with a lot of litigation. So it's been a constant struggle, both the county and state level, to try to keep on top of all this stuff. And I feel like we've done a pretty good job as a team with the counties and the state together. But the counties are the ones who really are the ones that are on the ground executing the election itself. We're kind of standing up and saying, look out for this, look out for that. And we can advise counties to do things. We can very rarely, make them do anything, but we can give a lot of requests and a lot of advice.
All right. So did you have anything to add to that, or?
Well, here's what I would add to it. This is a tidbit. So Mark Zuckerberg has poured a lot of money into the Center for Tech and Civic Life to give grants out to localities to help them deal with elections. What Fulton and DeKalb have received recently from them dwarfs the state's elections budget, as Gabe was saying. We're thankful for that, for sure. We think it's saving a lot of things in Fulton and DeKalb. And Zuckerberg and his partner decided to add $100 million into the pot extra last Thursday. So again, elections cost a lot of money, and a lot of people are interested in making sure Georgia localities have what they need to run their election, including some of the richest people in existence, like Mark Zuckerberg.
Great. Either one of you can take this one. We were asked to remind folks about the times and dates of early voting.
In Fulton, you can go, Vasu, I'm assuming you're trying to find the link right now to put up for them. We have a lot of weekend voting in Fulton. There's 30 different locations right now. I think they're expanding it coming up next week. I can't recall right now. But they have more locations than anybody. And frankly, I don't know off the top of my head what they run. So Vasu, when you find that link, if you put it up there, that'd be helpful, because I have to with 159 counties and they all have different ones. So
yeah. And I will say this has come up in some of the work I do in terms of statewide things. Depending on where you live, the statute that talks about early voting says it happens in normal business hours. And what we found is that particularly in some rural counties, for example, one on a Friday is open from 9 to 2. And so when people came to vote at 4 o'clock, the county was closed, but that's because the normal business hours rule. So to the extent that there's folks on here, friends or relatives in other places in Georgia, it's always good to check with your local county voting office to determine when and where they can cast an early in-person vote there. while we're talking about in-person voting and casting, Gabe, you talked about rolling out the new machines. Do you want to just speak briefly to that? And then Vasu, I'd love to get your take on how they're working as well.
Okay. We had a passage of bill called HB 316 that essentially designated a ballot marking device to be the device we use under law in this state uniformly to cast your ballot. What it is, it's kind of like the touchscreen we're all sort of used to, but with the additional item now that it prints out a ballot where you can see your selections on that ballot. And it's very important you review those selections to make sure they're what you intended to vote. And then we centrally have at every polling location a minimum of one scanner. Now, one of the things that is different now, we were in the old DRE time where we pressed a button, we gave our card in and we were done and we got our sticker. When you had more people going to a location, it was easy, just put more DREs there. With the addition of paper, it fundamentally changes the underlying system you're using. And to a degree on that, we now, that's part of the analysis we've had to do for all these polling locations. Let's pretend we have a pretty good clip going of voters, okay? Say one every 25 seconds. Once you get your flow going in the morning and say on average, one for every 25 seconds, they're gonna be casting a ballot. And that's pretty quick. They don't come uniformly like that, but it's just as a thought exercise to try to measure out some of these things. The most people you can have vote on a single scanner, if at that rate, which is pretty fast, is 1,725 at a 12-hour voting day. So we have to go over and look at all the polling locations to make sure that they didn't have any issues with that. And a lot of localities did because they hadn't thought about that because paper is all new to us. And having that there is going to give people that confidence in the sense that, yes, my vote is being cast properly. Because before, the biggest indication we had before was a ding that your vote's been counted. Okay, move on. So, and the secondary part of that is for the first time, we're now going to have an auditable trail. And we are going to do a statewide risk limiting audit. And I won't get into the details of risk limiting audit is because it's one of those algorithm Georgia Tech MIT things. I'm a UGA guy. But it'll allow us to make sure that the outcome of the election is reflected properly by getting a sampling of the ballots around the state of Georgia. So it's going to, and we're doing an RLA out of the gate, which most states don't do. It takes years to build some of these things. One of the things I've been impressed with so far with our counties and with our team here is we've been able to turn stuff on a dime, like standing up an absentee ballot voting system that many states take years to build. We did in weeks. We made a decision and executed getting out the absentee ballot requests in days. So we've been really good with that. The counties have adopted these things. They've kind of been flexible enough to get through these things. And it does take some training. We have the new poll pads. Those are all new. We have the new BMDs. Those are all. We have new scanners. We have a new central scanner. And in fact, one of the really great things about the system we have now is it's going to let our people begin the process of opening and scanning the absentee ballots earlier. Another state election board rule that was passed, we did one for June and one now. We gave them 1 week early to do it for June, but since we've seen the heavy adoption, we're going to give them 2 weeks now. They can open and scan those things. Under the old system, the scanner tabulated it as it went. Under the new system, it doesn't. Because if we still tabulated that way, we couldn't do this. And we would be sitting here for a week or two afterwards, still trying to scan and tabulate. So having this ability and working with the counties, we're trying to get them to, I know the ACLU sent a letter out encouraging everybody to do the early scanning. We've been encouraging the counties for weeks and months to do it, but they have a lot of stuff on them all at the same time. They have to LNA the equipment. They have to keep on doing poll worker training. They have to do early voting. It's a lot of work on the counties, and some of them are under-resourced. So we're working with them. We've got Voting Works coming in to help us do the RLA. It's another outside third-party group that does this all over the country. We're training people as we go. We're in constant training all the time. And the new system, once people get to it, they feel pretty good. I mean, they feel confident. You know, they get to look at their ballot. They get to scan it. I do encourage everybody to make sure you review your ballot. Take your time on the machines. They're good for the disability community. You can make the font bigger. You can switch out the contrast on it. It's a little bit better than the last machines. We have ATIs, which is the audio tactile interface at every polling location to allow for the disability community to vote as independently as they can. So we've got a lot of good positives in this system. And we really did heavily load the amount of machines that we sent out to the counties. The law calls for a minimum of 1 BMD per 250 voters. The amount of equipment we sent out at a minimum in many of these counties is 1 for 225. so they can deploy those internally inside their precincts as they see fit. And some counties, because we replaced every DRE they had, like take DeKalb County, they have one BMD for every 180 voters because they had spent so much money on DREs in the past. So we feel good about having these things out there. This is now going to be the fourth or fifth time many people will be voting on these. It'll be the fourth or fifth time that some of our county people will be working with it, given the numbers of runoffs and specials and other. It's 2020, so we've had a lot of odd elections going on. So, but no, I feel like the adoption has been very well received. We've seen no real issues with the equipment itself. And one of the things I want to make clear, we heard about machinery malfunctions and equipment malfunctions in June. Not the case. You had people who didn't necessarily know what to do with the equipment. So we had, of the 50,000 or so pieces of equipment we had deployed, only 14 were taken out of service or had to be replaced. And some of the things we've done to help mitigate that, I'm going to go to my visual aids I was showing the panelists earlier. One of the biggest problems we saw was on the encoders and the poll pads to make the cards. They were in upside down. So the first thing on the troubleshooting list they're supposed to look at was flip encoder over, but people weren't doing that. So we made a sticker that says, "This side to poll worker." So we're trying to avoid that. The other biggest problem we saw was we have a battery backup for the BMDs, which is mainly for the printer because there's already a battery backup in the touchscreen. And in order to power those UPSs, the battery backups, you have to hold the button for 5 seconds, but people weren't. They pressed the button, they'd walk away. So we made a sticker for that too that says, "Hold button for 5 seconds," at least. So we're trying to make it as, user-friendly as we can for all those poll workers that are out there, because many of these people are going to be their first time doing it. They're going to do it 1 time or 2 times a year. So it's going to take some cajoling to remember all this stuff. And we try to do all the training with the techs and the poll workers as close to the election as possible so they don't forget this stuff in the meantime.
Got it. Sue, do you have anything to add to that?
So the first thing I'd like to mention is I am a DeKalb County poll worker. I've worked multiple elections in this cycle. So the equipment that we're using is of interest. I would say from the ACLU of Georgia perspective, we just want to make sure that all the voting equipment works and that there's enough of it there. And as Gabe mentioned, that we take iterative steps to make things more and more intuitive. As long as that's occurring, great. That means the voter can go in and cast their ballot and have that ballot counted. I will mention though, and I speak as somebody who is a Georgia Tech grad and used to work as a technologist before I went to UGA for law school. So I kind of have double allegiances there. Some of this equipment is not the most intuitive, right? I think that people sometimes assume that Google and Apple are designing everything, but this is a voting system that needed some iterative improvements as we've gone along. I'll mention one thing in particular, and it's an example of how we've been able to work very well with the Secretary of State's office. I noticed when I worked the August 11th runoff that if a voter who had shown up early came to vote on election day for whatever reason, some of these folks just forgot that they voted early. There was a display that said "advance in person" next to the voter's name, but nothing actually stopped the check-in clerk from checking that voter in and sending them to the machine, other than noticing that it said "advance in person," and it was kind of in small type. It was easy to miss, and once I noticed that, I flagged that for the Secretary of State's office. One thing leads to another, and now if you show up as advanced in person, you cannot advance to go to the machines without some more intricate override process, if anything. So that's what we're concerned with, right? We want these machines to work, and we want to keep taking iterative processes, iterative steps, that is to say, to make sure that the folks who are operating on those machines and are setting those machines up can do so correctly and make sure that the polls open right at 7 a.m. I'll also mention, when we talk about the voting equipment, we're talking about many different pieces of equipment. There are the check-in poll pads, and then we have the ballot marking devices, along with the printer that's attached to the ballot marking device and the scanner. Any one of those things can go wrong, right? So the more steps we take to ensure that these things are set up well ahead of time, and that we have dry runs proving that they're working well ahead of time before the polls open, the better off we all are.
And one of the issues we saw in June was our office works with counties all the time to say nothing ever stops voting. And we have multiple backup systems in place. And one of the issues we saw with COVID was the loss of our more seasoned poll workers, who were rightly a little more concerned about COVID than other ones. And what we lost there wasn't about the equipment. It was about the institutional knowledge of election processes. What happens if this doesn't work? What do we do? What we saw in Fulton, especially, where unfortunately they thought they were good on people. And then, as I think we've all known, they put out a call at the last minute for 250 additional poll workers on the Saturday, Sunday, and Monday before the election, and told Channel 2 News that night the first time that all those people had ever seen the election equipment was Tuesday when they walked in. So we have backup processes for all this stuff. If you can't encode a card, use a ballot activation code for the BMD. If they have a power outage and the BMD goes out, then use paper ballots. If the poll book goes out, use the paper poll books you have there. They have been there for 20 years. If the scanner goes down, put it in the emergency bin. There's nothing should ever stop voting. And we have multiple different backup systems in place for that to happen. As long as the poll workers are trained and understand, nothing should ever stop voting. And I felt good about a couple of these things because in August, there were 2 locations in Fulton County where they had some runoffs going on. And one security guard who had the key overslept. Another one, they lost the key for the door. But the poll manager did the proper thing and voted provisional ballots outside the door. So the people who showed up were able to vote, and they didn't have to have any judicial extensions because everybody was offered the opportunity to vote the way they should have been able to in many of the situations we saw in Fulton in June, where essentially people just shut down. They just said, I don't know what to do. I'm not going to do anything. And so I think through training and through, as Vasu talked about, the iterative process of, you're supposed to do this, people, do it the right way. We're getting in a situation where I feel like we're in a better place. But at the same time, thousands of people producing an election all at one time. We are all flawed. We are all capable of making mistakes. We're going to see that. There's never been a perfect election in the history of mankind. It doesn't exist. You know why? Human beings are involved. It doesn't mean that there's voter fraud. It doesn't mean there's voter suppression. It means there's human beings trying to do the best they can, given the resources they have in the situation they're in.
And I'm going to take a minute and remind the audience too that you can submit questions to us via the chat function, and we've got a little bit of time left and we can take some more questions. I would like to take just a second and talk about, you heard now from both Vasu and Gabe on how they've worked together on these issues. And if you read, public reports and heaven forbid, if you actually read Twitter, then you would think that everyone is literally at each other's throats all the time. And a lot of that may be the case.
Josh is frozen now. I'm assuming everybody sees that. All right. Okay. So he was trying to give us a kumbaya moment that Vasu and I are both shaking our head about. Josh, you're still frozen. So
can you hear me?
Oh, there you are. You're back. You're back. You're still, your face is still frozen in your screen, but we can hear you now. So continue to say how great we are working together. Well, now we can't hear him at all. Vasu, do you want to speak to that real quick?
Yeah, while Josh is coming back, that's been one of the pleasures of this cycle for me, being able to get deeply into the details, into things that, folks like me and Gabe can nerd out about, instead of some of like the core philosophical debates. And again, as Josh mentioned, the way the media and Twitter will portray these kinds of issues. It's not. It's not a core social issue, right? I think a lot of people are in agreement that we want to ensure that voters who are eligible have access to the ballot. And sometimes there are philosophical disagreements on how to do that. For example, some folks truly believe that hand-marked paper ballots are the only way to ensure a secure voting process. And some folks are diehard voting machine folks. But again, at some point, if you have folks yelling voter fraud on one side and voter suppression on the other side, and the poll workers just sitting there like, I'm supposed to have a login for this computer. My login suddenly doesn't work. What do you want me to do? There are better ways to fix these issues than to yell some of the terms that are oft repeated when it comes to these processes. The devil is often in the details, so we can often work together to figure those out.
And Vasu has a standing call with Deputy Secretary. Is it every week? Every week, and I usually come in on some of them, and we go over just different things we're hearing and seeing. And some of this stuff is real, some of it's not so much. Like even earlier, Vasu had heard that Muskogee County was short 100 poll workers. I texted the director, and they said, "No, we got not only are we full, we got a 150 person waiting list." So a lot of the stuff, if I ever want to feel really bad about myself, I can just go to Twitter for an hour or so, because obviously I'm a horrible human being who's doing a terrible job. But in general, all these groups tend to work together. There's some that were, as Vasu said, there are some fundamental philosophical differences, and some people can work through them. Other people are going to die on every hill. So we do our best to execute these things. And like Vasu said, this is about a poll worker making sure, or poll manager making sure they've got their code in place so they can override things where they need to. Making sure equipment gets to the right place and helping, like right now in Fulton County, they have a bad COVID outbreak in their warehouse. I'm sure some of y'all have seen that on the news. We had brought in a logistics firm about 3 weeks ago. It was helping them with what we wanted to help them with a lot more stuff. We were helping them do some of their new location evaluations because they added 91. And because of this now, our team is going to step in and really try to take some command and control to really help the logistics side of this. And it's that kind of way across the state. The state has provided, funding to the counties to fill a lot of these needs. We get information from ACLU. We try to share stuff where we can find common ground. We try to work with that to make it work together. Vasu and I were on the inaugural call today. We have a bipartisan group that's there to work for long-term, not just this election, but moving forward to make election administration better in Georgia, because there's never a perfect scheme to do any of this stuff. And it's a bipartisan group. I mean, we got former Congressman Lynn Westmoreland, and we got Ambassador Andrew Young on the same group, with Carter Center somewhere in there too, and ACLU, and Center for Election Innovation and Research, and our office. And we're all here trying to make sure that election administration is done well. And frankly, there's partisan internal arguments over, well, this kind of voting helps somebody versus somebody else, or helps, to my mind, from this office. The ability to vote is the ability for an individual registered voter in this state to make their opinion known through the electoral process. And it's even to everyone. Everybody has every option available to them in the same way. You can choose to focus on one option. You can choose to focus on another option. As we've seen right now, there's a lot more Democratic use of mail-in voting. There's a lot more in-person voting from Republicans. And it's all even and fair. As long as it's evenly and fairly distributed, our main goal of this office is whoever wins, whoever loses, believes the outcome of that election is correct. And we have to support the underlying confidence of the voters. And this is a problem from the left and the right. Stacey Abrams has never conceded the governor's race. Donald Trump is talking about not conceding. Hillary Clinton told Joe Biden, don't concede no matter what. All of that is bad. We want to make sure that at the end of the day, that everybody believes the outcome of the vote and they understand that their vote counted equally to everybody else's.
Gotcha. Thank you both for that, and sorry for taking a quick break. That was not intentional. We've got about 10 minutes left, and one of the questions we've had come across is whether we can someone just explain how provisional ballots are counted or not counted, and if a voter is asked to complete a provisional ballot, what should that voter do?
Vasu, I'm going to leave that to you because that falls more into the legal department.
Sure. So various categories of voters have to vote on a provisional ballot if they show up on election day. Some of the classic examples I'll give you. If you're not found in the poll book and you're not found on the backup list, but you believe that you submitted your registration in time and you are a valid voter within that precinct, you'll be sent to vote on a provisional ballot. Some of the other classic examples, if you're out of precinct, okay, if you're in Fulton County, massive county, and you show up to a precinct other than the one that you're assigned to, the only way you can vote there is on a provisional ballot. A lot of these provisional ballots are counted, and there's nothing you would need to do extra to have them counted. For example, this out of precinct ballot is a classic example. In fact, and please don't do this, but some folks, due to convenience's sake, will show up to precincts they're not assigned to, but within the same county, because they know they have a right to a provisional ballot, and they want to, for convenience's sake, show up to perhaps the precinct next to where they work or something like that. There's another kind of provisional ballot, and I think the most popular example of that is if you don't have the required photo ID, as Gabe mentioned, and you show up to your precinct, they're going to send you to vote on a provisional ballot. In that case, it's called a provisional ballot that you must cure. So the two categories are self-curing and non-self-curing. Curing just means you need to do something to ensure that this vote is going to count, that there's something extra that needs to be provided in terms of the information. And in that example, you're going to have to show up to your county's office to show them the ID, or prove that you're that voter in some other ways, maybe even sending a copy of your ID. And I think some of these cure processes can vary, but nonetheless, that means you have to do something in order to show that you were the person that cast this ballot. One of the myths around provisional ballots is none of them count, right? And that's just not true. Every cycle, many of them count. We do see situations where they are not properly processed or handled many times, and that's one of the things that we at the ACLU of Georgia are intent on ensuring that counties handle these provisional ballots correctly. But those are some of the classic situations where you'll be voting a provisional ballot. One of the things that we see each cycle, and this speaks also to poll worker training and human error. Sometimes we see folks show up outside of the county in which they're registered, and they're told, "Oh, you can vote a provisional ballot." And sometimes intuitively, a human being who's handling that process might say, "Oh yeah, look, Donald Trump's on the ballot in here too, so your vote for that race is going to count." Provisional ballots don't count if they're cast outside of the county, and that's one of the myths we see around this process. And unfortunately, we've seen too many occurrences of poll workers making the wrong claim to a voter on that occurred. We've also seen where a poll worker shows up outside of their registered precinct, but within the right county, that voter has a right to a provisional ballot. And we have seen poll managers refuse to give those voters provisional ballots. So there's a training aspect that we're still working on here to make sure that voters and poll workers alike know how to handle provisional ballots and understand the system. And I hope that this short description of the process helps y'all understand the system and be folks who are breaking down some of these myths around the provisional ballot process.
And one other thing to add on that, don't vote out of precinct. Don't put yourself in a position to have to do a provisional ballot, because as Vasu said, there are times they're not handled properly. And one question, potentially, I'm not sure you and I agree on this one. I think if you vote outside of your precinct, inside the county, the votes below the line of where you were, if you're in the wrong district, don't count then. If you're given a ballot because it's a hand marked ballot, you don't have the right to vote in the local county commission, state house, those kind of things, because you're outside of that precinct. So your entire ballot doesn't count. The top of it would count, but not anything where you're outside of district. Is that correct to say?
And that's a very good point. When you cast a provisional ballot out of your precinct, you don't suddenly get the right to vote in races that wouldn't have been on the ballot for your precinct. The only races that are going to count, the only votes that are going to count are the ones that you cast in races that would have been included on the ballot for your precinct.
Yeah. So please go to your right polling location. And the thing about provisionals is you have a right to cast one there, but they're also going to say, you are within 10 minutes of your polling location. Please go vote in the proper place. And that way you can be fully enfranchised by voting your entire ballot. And I think that's a better thing to do.
Vasu, we got another question that I'm going to shift to you, which is, do all voting locations allow for people needing assistance? And it looks like they're asking about disabled voters.
They should.
Yep.
They should. And by law now, you can use anybody for assistance there, and that's an expansion in the law that we've supported. That being said, not all polling locations are set up correctly. Sometimes this question speaks to ADA compliance. This is something that we're continually working on, especially as polling locations expand. We want to make sure that folks, who have a wide array of disabilities can access the votes. But yes, by law, folks who have disabilities are entitled to vote and entitled to have assistance from a person of their choice in order to do so.
Unless they're a candidate or a candidate spouse, I think specifically.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think employer or agent of the
Yes.
employee as well.
And I'll add to that, there's a statute that allows in early in-person voting, if you are elderly, you can go to the front of the line if there is a line. And so that leads me to what will likely be our last question, which is if someone goes to vote in person early, or they've had a challenge or a problem with their absentee ballot, or they're on election day voting and something goes wrong, who should they call? What should they do?
Something goes wrong is a very broad question.
Sure, I'm not talking about tornadoes and acts of God. If they're told they can't, that they're not registered, or that they're not, their name isn't showing up. Vasu, I know ACLU works with other groups or may directly run a hotline if you want to. That's where I was kind of headed. Circulate that.
Sure.
And on the chat function. And Gabe, is there a number either with the state or the county that they should call if they're having problems voting?
There is, and I don't know it's off my head, so I'm going to go find it quick.
Okay. There is one. It's on the Secretary's website on the election division. There's a hotline, but also groups from the Lawyers Committee, ACLU, Fair Fight, et cetera, all have different and possibly even linked numbers to call. So there is something you can do. Jan, you told me we needed to cut this short at 12:58. My clock is showing it's 12:57. So I want to thank all the people who participated. I'm sorry, there were a couple questions we couldn't get to. I'm sure we can find a way to get you that information through email or something else. I also want to thank both Vasu and Gabe for participating. I know you've both got, I know you've got a lot going on right now, and appreciative for all you're doing for voters, for the state, and to make sure the election runs smoothly. So thank you all. Jan, thank you for putting this together, Clarissa, and all the others at Leadership Sandy Springs as well.
Well, thank you very much, Josh. And I do want to thank Gabe and Vasu and Josh. Great panel discussion today. Have sat in on a number of them. And I think by far this was the best. A lot of great information. So thank you for your expertise very much. And on behalf of the audience, I'll do this. We appreciate you. Also, I do want to say this does not happen without a lot of background work. And I do want to say that I want to thank our committee co-chairs, our Live, Learn, Lead committee co-chairs, Pam Rosenthal and Leslie Walden, put a lot of work into it. Our communications committee co-chairs, Clarissa Sparks and Carol Seapluck. Thank you for making all of this possible. And then I just want to let you know that I mentioned this is our first of our Live, Learn, Lead luncheons. We will be having another one on December 3rd. And again, talking about a relevant topic to our community, and that's policing in Sandy Springs and the surrounding areas. I do want to let you know that we have our Q&A in our chat room. We are going to make a copy of that and get back to any other questions that may not have been answered. And in addition, we recorded this video chat, this Zoom seminar, and we have had requests from people that could not attend and from our mayor and council asking if they could get a copy of it. I think they will be sharing it on their e-newsletters. So we are trying to reach far and wide into our community, and we're very appreciative of everybody that shared time with us today, our audience, our panelists, and everybody behind the scenes. So thank you very much for attending, and we hope to see everybody back again on December 3rd when we do our next show on policing. Thank you very much, everyone.